I need your help discussing this one and categorizing this in a genre because I'm confused and I need some guidance. So the book I'm going to talk about is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. And I liked this book. I did. I truly did. But it confused me because this was marketed to me as a romance. I went into this thinking it was a rom-com, like a romantic comedy, kind of like Ladies Guide. I was thinking it was the same vibe, and this is really not a rom-com. It's more like a romantic literary fiction book. Because, and the reason I say that is because there is heavy romance in this book, but I think the primary focus is actually the interpersonal relationships between not just the two main characters, the love interests, but the people around them as well. This also deals with some really heavy themes and really heavy triggers, which I wasn't expecting, because again, I thought it was like a rom-com, so like lighthearted and funny and fun and fluffy, and this is not fluffy. I would not describe this as fluffy in any sense of the word, but this did have romance, and the romance was a really big proponent of the story. So I don't know how to categorize this book. I'd say if you've read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, though that book and this book have a very similar feel to them in terms of genre. Like they're more literary, they're dealing with some more heavy topics, and there is a heavy romance element, but it's maybe not a romance book. I don't really know how to talk about this. So I'm gonna move past that and just talk about the things that worked and the things that didn't work in this book for me in particular. So I gave this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I liked it. This is about Shane and Eva, who were high school sweethearts. They spent 7 days together in June in their senior year of high school and fell in love, and then something broke them apart. And now they're meeting again 15 years later, also in June, and this takes place over a week in June. And so it's about them rekindling their romance for each other, but again, dealing with stuff in their personal lives and going and, healing from some trauma. So trigger warnings for death of a child, gun violence, alcoholism, drug addiction, drug use, medical trauma, medical gaslighting, chronic illness. Eva struggles really heavily with chronic migraines that are so horrible. So just, again, be careful with this one. Some things that I liked about this: I loved the romance. I think it was super cute. When they did have like those cutesy romance scenes, I thought it was great. There was some good smut. There was like 2 scenes in here that were pretty good. I thought the writing was really good in this as well. And then there were some things that didn't work for me as much. Again, I think I prefer rom-coms, so something that's a little bit lighter and fluffier and more fun, and this is just not that. So it's not my preferred genre. And there was also a couple lines that kind of stuck out to me. For example, in the beginning of the book, Eva kind of bashes the romance genre and her readers because she's a romance erotica writer in this book, and she makes a kind of a thought in her head about how kind of silly romance readers are, and I'm like, that's a little weird since this is supposed to be a romance novel. You are a romance novelist, so are you like belittling your readers a little bit? I don't know, that felt weird to me. There's also a character who is kind of a free spirit. She's a poet, and she's kind of into like Reiki healing, and so she's kind of like a spiritual person, and she talks about, she makes a comment about using sage, and that is an American indigenous cultural practice that I learned recently that is a closed practice, and only people who are Indigenous Americans, Native Indigenous Americans, should be doing saging or like cleansing with sage. So that was just something that stuck out to me as something, as like a no-no, like a cultural appropriation thing. Just because I had recently just learned about it. So just take that with a grain of salt, I guess. Again, it's like 2 lines out of this entire book that like kind of bothered me. So, editing Hannah here, one of my clips for talking about this book somehow got corrupted. I just wanted to pop in and give you one last thought about this book, and to talk about like the reason I gave it a 3.5 stars. Everything you've seen up to this point is like, okay, that's a little nitpicky, but the reason that I didn't love this is because of the way that the story was told. So we get 2 points of views chapters. So we get primarily Eva and Shane, the 2 love interests, but we also get random side characters' points of views, either whole chapters in their heads or sections that are told through their lens. And if you've been on my channel for any length of time, you know that I don't really enjoy that method of storytelling. That's just not my preferred writing choice. So when all these other characters started popping in and we started getting more of their input, it just kind of pulled me out of the story a little bit. And it just is not my cup of tea in terms of execution and storytelling methods. So that's why I gave it a 3.5 stars. So while I loved the romance elements, I even enjoyed some of the darker themes and the heavier topics and how that was done. It just was focusing so much on the interpersonal relationships with all of these other characters, that I didn't really fully love it, if that makes sense. So back to past Hannah. So overall, I really did enjoy this. It just, I don't think was the genre for me. Thinking that I was getting a rom-com, and this is like a literary romance.